Hello and welcome to Midweek Matters. Today, I will begin by reading out a news report. An independent public inquiry into the government's handling of the coronavirus pandemic will begin, the Prime Minister announced. He said, amid such tragedy, the government has an obligation to examine its actions as rigorously and candidly as possible and learn every lesson for the future. He added that this inquiry must be able to look at the events of the last year and identify the key issues that will make a difference for the future. He continued that the inquiry will be free to scrutinize every document, to hear from all the key players and analyze and learn from the breadth of our response. He said he expected the inquiry to put the government's actions under the microscope. He also volunteered to give evidence to the inquiry under oath if asked to. Here I must hasten to tell you, before you wonder, when did our Prime Minister make this announcement, that it is not our Prime Minister's announcement. It is Mr. Boris Johnson's, the Prime Minister of a smaller democracy, the United Kingdom. Today, I want to speak to you about the inescapable need to immediately constitute an independent public inquiry to scrutinize the roles of our central government and the state governments, as well as the conduct of the public in handling the tragic situation arising out of the COVID-19 pandemic. Britain is not the only country willing to examine the government's role in handling the COVID crisis. Sweden launched a commission of experts led by a former president of the Supreme Administrative Court to investigate the country's controversial liberal approach to virus containment. It will issue a final report in early 2022 and 2 interim reports before that. The Swedish Prime Minister had ordered the public inquiry into his government's handling of the coronavirus crisis after the country recorded about 5,000 COVID-19 deaths. Yes, you heard me right. After about 5,000 deaths. Norway has set up an independent commission to assess the overall adequacy of its COVID response. In Italy, prosecutors from the northern province of Bergamo spent 3 hours questioning Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte in June 2020 as they deepened their inquiry into whether official missteps caused one of the world's deadliest coronavirus outbreaks in the country. Yes, again you heard me right. The PM was questioned for 3 hours. They also questioned the health and interior ministers on how the government handled the COVID pandemic. A special French court has ordered the investigation into the government's handling of the corona crisis. French police searched the homes of Health Minister Olivier Véran, former Prime Minister Eduardo Philippe, and other officials in May 2020 as part of an inquiry into the government's handling of the coronavirus crisis. Véran is one of several current or former ministers under investigation over their response to the coronavirus pandemic following complaints by victims of COVID-19 that they were too slow to act. Present Prime Minister Jean Castex is also a subject of the investigation, as are his predecessor as well as former health minister. In Brazil, the Supreme Court has ordered the Senate in April this year to investigate the government's handling of the coronavirus crisis. The Parliament of Victoria, an Australian state, inquired into the government's handling of pandemic and submitted its report in February this year. An independent inquiry has been launched into the European Union's response to the coronavirus outbreak after one of its agencies observed that confusion, complacency, and lack of coordination plunged the continent into crisis. The European Ombudsman report on European institutions' response to COVID was published just a fortnight ago on 18th of May. World Health Assembly, the governing structure of the World Health Organization, WHO, voted last year to have an independent evaluation to review experience gained and lessons learned from the WHO coordinated international health response to COVID-19. India supported the resolution. The report was submitted last month. I have given links to all these reports in the description section below. Please do spare some time and look at them. Our cumulative infections so far are 2,81,69,970, and the deaths in the country so far are 3,31,871. Experts tell us that the infections have peaked sometime in the first week of May, but deaths are yet to decline proportionately. By Monday night, the total daily infections reported are 1,22,964, and the daily deaths are 2,743. Expert epidemiologists like Professor Bhramar Mukherjee of University of Michigan and media persons from the ground tell us that the deaths are underreported by a factor of 4 to 5. About 7 in 9 deaths are going unreported or undetected. Or, to put it another way, only 2 out of every 9 deaths are reported. The New York Times COVID tracker says a more likely scenario is 16 lakh deaths and a worst case scenario is 42 lakh deaths, not 3.3 lakh deaths as the official figures tell us. Should it just be an expert's word against the government's word? Shouldn't the nation know the truth? Shouldn't we take the help of an independent public inquiry to know the exact extent of loss of lives in our country? The government told Parliament that it did not have data on the deaths of doctors, frontline health workers, and migrant labor. In the absence of credible official figures, there are all sorts of estimates doing the rounds. Should we not put an end to this? Shouldn't an independent public inquiry go into it and tell us, the nation, what is the toll? Should it be just anybody's guess? Many people are laboring under the impression that gatherings such as Tablighi and Kumbh, as well as election rallies, were the super spreader events of the virus. Some select just 1 or 2 from among them and dismiss others depending on their persuasion or limited information. Shouldn't we know for sure which ones are responsible and to what extent? Shouldn't we take the help of an independent public inquiry for this, so that we can prevent such spreader events in future? The Minister of State for Health gave data to Parliament some time ago on the number of ICUs, hospital beds, and beds with oxygen facility that were added during the lockdown to deal with the requirement. Some people feel that these preparations were inadequate and the result is the large-scale deaths during the second phase. Others feel that health was neglected for the last 70 years and this government could not have done much in the 1 year to prepare for the massive outbreak of the second wave. Again, one word against the other. Shouldn't we have an independent public inquiry to settle this and also suggest measures for future? There is a feeling that some people's utterances caused vaccine hesitancy and hindered government's effort to fight the pandemic. Is this true? Were they able to cause such large-scale disruption to government initiatives? Only an independent public inquiry could shine light on this. Otherwise, we will be unable to decide on the allegations and counter-allegations. It should also examine the role of the general public, political parties, influencers such as media, celebrities, and volunteer organizations during the pandemic. Government ministers tell us that there is no difficulty with the vaccination drive, but the rate is sluggish, uneven, and inadequate. Experts tell us that the rate at which vaccination is going, we may not be able to complete it even by the end of this year. Government rubbishes this claim. We heard from a Niti Aayog functionary that the government made all efforts to procure vaccines. The member also said that the government was in active engagement with the producers from the beginning. Shouldn't we know the details of that active engagement and its outcome? Shouldn't we take the help of an independent public inquiry? Supporters of the ruling dispensation at the center argue that it's the states that are responsible for the lack of medical infrastructure and therefore inadequate response to the COVID crisis. But there are others who contend that since it is a pandemic, it's the main responsibility of the union government. Shouldn't we know for sure instead of hearing one word slung against the other? Should we not take the help of an independent public inquiry? Shouldn't we have clarity and a credible assessment on how was the response of each state government and the union government in this crisis? Some people argue that the differential pricing of vaccine, center buying at cheaper price than the states, is unjust and indefensible. Even the Supreme Court raised the issue. The center probably feels that it is justified. Otherwise, why will it act unjustly? But shouldn't we know from an independent public inquiry whether that kind of a pricing is right? Digital activists feel that COVID structurally excludes the digital exiles, such as marginal, the poor, and the rural people from accessing vaccine slots. Technology experts of the center disagree. Shouldn't an independent public inquiry examine the issue and tell us the efficacy of the app and the portal that register the people for vaccination so that we don't have to take sides with insufficient information? And any conclusion that such inquiry will come to can surely help the nation immensely in future eventualities. There's a sharp controversy surrounding the availability of medical oxygen and other facilities. People died, thousands of them, for lack of oxygen, ventilators, ICU beds, and even ordinary hospital beds. They died outside the hospitals, waiting to be allowed in. But government told courts, even the highest court of the land, that there was enough oxygen and other facilities. Should we not know the truth? States went to courts to wrest higher allocations of oxygen from the center. Shouldn't an independent public inquiry examine the claims of center and state and help settle a policy framework so that in future we won't be in a muddle on such issues? There were murmurs that we could have taken care in the initial stage itself, avoided gatherings like Namaste Trump. Did such events amount to negligence, deliberate or otherwise innocent? Only an independent public inquiry can throw light on it, instead of us picking one version or the other from the noisy TV debates. We have heard that the government constituted several task forces. Now and then we also saw reports that some of them were disbanded. We do not know what work they did, what advice and support they offered the government, and if it was of any use to the government. Their meetings must have been minuted. A thorough examination of their proceedings and their interaction with the decision makers in the government by an independent public inquiry will be of much use to the nation in its future efforts to combat any such crisis. The government's efforts to rescue the economy during the crisis came in for criticism. The adequacy and appropriateness of its financial and economic response needs an objective examination so that future responses could incorporate its best features and modify or omit its ineffective ones. Shouldn't we benefit from an assessment of an independent public inquiry? While announcing the setting up of the inquiry, the British Prime Minister said that already about 50 parliamentary committees were going over the various aspects of the government's response. In addition, National Audit Office has already published 17 reports of its findings. That raises the point about our parliament. Does our parliament also have committees that are currently examining the way the executive is handling the situation? I have not come across any reports. If you have, please do let me know by leaving your remarks in the comment section. If they are not set up and not working, we should know why. An independent public inquiry would help here too. Well, I do not intend to give an exhaustive list of all the benefits of an independent public inquiry. I will mention only one more. An objective scrutiny of the way our governments have handled the pandemic response would be beneficial to the entire world. Other countries can emulate our best practices and avoid the mistakes, if any, in the way we conducted ourselves. This is in keeping with our aspiration to be a Vishwaguru. Our experience can teach the world. Some governments, such as Norway's, Sweden's, and Victoria's in Australia, constituted inquiries on their own. Their rivers did not carry the COVID dead. Britain did it when a petition was submitted to its parliament by the general public. There were no dead bodies in the Thames. In France, Italy, and Brazil, a strong and independent judiciary was instrumental. There were no bodies in the Seine, Tiber, and Amazon rivers. European Union responded to the observations of one of its agencies. WHO had constituted an inquiry as a result of the vote by its member countries. With the massive scale of tragedy that unfolded, I suppose India should not need a nudge. As the biggest democracy in the world, with a strong government, we should be self-confident to have our practices, procedures, initiatives, policies submitted to a rigorous examination by an independent inquiry. I'm sure the government has more open mind than many of its critics are willing to grant it. Can we hope for an announcement by the Union government constituting an independent public inquiry into the way our governments handled their response to the COVID-19 crisis? An independent public inquiry into the government's handling of COVID response we must have. And if the government has inquiry hesitancy, and should it need a nudge, the civil society, if necessary even the judiciary, must not hesitate to give it a good one. That's all we have time for today. We'll be back again next week, Wednesday, lunchtime at 1 o'clock. Take good care of yourselves and all your loved ones. Until then, bye.